praegune ettekandja Kate Sumnall, kes on praegu ka ekraanil, hello Kate, on selles mõttes sama valdkonnaga seotud, et ta on kureerinud Londoni muuseumis näitust, mille sisu keskendub sellele samale Thames'i jõe kalda leidudele. Kate on Londoni ülikooli kolledži UCL-i lõpetanud ja saab kohe rääkida Londonis olevast näitusest. Hello Kate, I hope you can hear us and you are ready to start with your presentation. We are here introducing you in Estonian and the floor now is yours. You're welcome.
Thank you very much. So good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak today. I'd like to share with you some of the research and design behind the creation of our major temporary exhibition at London Museum Docklands called Secrets of the Thames, Mudlarking London's Lost Treasures. The exhibition focuses on the river to the banks for historic artifacts. So what I'll now do is I'll share my presentation, which means that you'll lose the camera side. So bear with me. So on to the next slide. So this is the River Thames, taken while stood on the foreshore looking at the southern bank. The Thames is tidal and has a foreshore is stable enough to be walked on. It is naturally a combination of gravels and mud, and it is considered to be one of the longest archaeological sites in the country. It's preserved on the banks are a number of archaeological structures that relate to the working rivers, such as barge beds, jetties, and fish traps. Then, amongst all of this, are the remains of everyday lives of generations of people that have lived, worked, or visited London. The mudlarks are people who visit the foreshore during the low tides, and they are searching for the historic artifacts that are exposed on the surface. The tidal action of the river and human actions such are members of the public. They are not formally trained in archaeology, but they have a passion for the past, and they research and they learn about the past and archaeological techniques. The foreshore is an important archaeological site and one that is constantly eroding and changing. There are not enough resources for professional archaeologists to regularly monitor the foreshore, but the mudlarks are down there every single low tide, and they are able to cover miles. By working closely with the mudlarks to record their finds, the structures, and they also alert us when there is a threat or a change to the foreshore. And all of this creates a really valuable how the river has been used and the people that have lived and worked alongside it throughout time. This photograph shows Monica, a mudlark, as she posed during an early morning low tide and for a photograph that will accompany our press release announcing the exhibition would be taking place. It was a beautiful morning, made even more incredible when Monica just reached out and pulled from between the pebbles this fork here. It dates back to the late 1600s, early 1700s, and it has the iron tines still there and a bone handle. It is in exceptional condition. The Thames mud is naturally anaerobic. It dramatically slows any corrosion. The waterlogged conditions, it effectively preserves artifacts that would not survive as well on land-based sites. Our approach for the exhibition was to try to capture that excitement of discovery that mudlarks experience when they search the foreshore. We wanted the exhibition to be as atmospheric and immersive as possible. We worked with a large team to create the exhibition. We recruited external designers, graphic designers, and digital specialists. And when we were explaining our ambitions for the exhibition and the themes we wanted to cover, we felt it was really important that we take them down to the foreshore themselves and to meet some mudlarks. It was really important that they had to get their feet muddy to be able to understand of what we were trying to convey within the exhibition. And then there was an incredible moment while we were planning the exhibition when a huge piece of Roman amphora was discovered, just starting to emerge from the foreshore. The mudlarks called us for support in lifting and recording the amphora. And at that time, when all of this was happening, I was supposed to be in a meeting at the museum with the designers. Instead, I was on the foreshore waiting for the tide to go out enough so that we could work on the amphora. Everything fell into place at the very last minute, and I still made it. Forgiven as I shared the story of the discovery of the amphora, and they were able to see it in person as it came straight into the museum, still wet, still muddy. And this was an incredibly important moment for the designers, and they understood the thrill of new discoveries constantly being found and the drama of recording them and retrieving them before they are lost. Then there are the mudlarks themselves. We worked with over 200 mudlarks to create this exhibition, and I wanted to make as many different opportunities for them to be involved as possible. They are incredibly knowledgeable, and their passion is infectious. In total, I think I borrowed more than 100 different artifacts from them to display within the exhibition that sits alongside artifacts from within the museum's core collections that have again been mudlarked, that have come from the river. We also found ways to involve their different skills that they have in life, such as creative skills, photography, writing, painting, drawing, and also journalism as well. One of them is an exceptional journalist, and we made use of those skills in interviewing other mudlarks to be featured in the exhibition. Some of the mudlarks are featured in a short film that sits within the exhibition that talks about how they research in events, talking to visitors about their finds. And then from others again, I borrowed photographs that were taken in the 1980s, which show how mudlarking has changed over the years. Now, onto the design of the exhibition. So this is the floor plan of the exhibition space, and we really wanted visitors to step into the world of mudlarks, and we wanted there to be a journey of the different moments of discovery from the foreshore to behind the scenes at the museum. The first room is to the right of this slide, and a blue arrow marks the entrance. In this first section, we explain what mudlarking is, created the foreshore as accurately as we can, and set within it there are cases holding mudlarked objects which explore these moments of London's history. They're all held within the objects, and each of those stories has a focus on different aspects of the river. In the history of mudlarking section, we explore the early records of the mudlarks that date back to the 1700s. They describe mainly women and children that scavenge on the foreshore, searching for scraps of metal, rope, and coal that could be sold. These were people that were living in utter poverty. And in this section, we have a painting by Henry Pether, which shows a very idealized view of the foreshore, with a garage to a house belonging to the wealthy. And in the foreground, there are two mudlarks, just children, that are on the foreshore mudlarking with a sack, and they are searching by moonlight. We also have published accounts which describes the mudlarks in broad terms, but there are also some more personal accounts, such as Peggy Jones, who is shown here in this engraving as possible. The account describes how she feels standing in the river with her bare feet, searching for round lumps of coal. This was dangerous in a filthy river with a lot of sharp material, as well as also start to introduce modern photography and also sculpture as we explore how mudlarks have changed over the years and how their motivations have shifted from trying to eke out a living from scraps that they could sell to being primarily interested in history and the ancient artifacts that foreshore as accurately as possible. And we worked with extremely talented set designers who helped build this three-dimensional foreshore and dressed it with rubble and rocks, modern rubbish to capture just what a dangerous and, how it has, as well as historic rubbish. And we put into that some archaeological artifacts and also replicas of objects that could be found in the cases. All of this to encourage our visitors, eyes down, to search to be a mudlark. And then set within that, we have the cases, as I said, and those cases hold mudlarked objects, such as some of the highlights that I show here. And we have sort of themed those cases so that they talk to aspects of historic life that are also true for our lives today. So those themes are things like food and drink, love, faith, migration, community, culture, all of these things. And the idea is that there is not a set route for visitors, but rather they look, they see what catches their eye out of the artifacts, and then they're drawn to explore what those artifacts can tell us about the past. So we have the mudlarked objects, but we also try to use a number of different ways to help visitors understand what these objects would have been, or how they would have been used, or what they would have looked like when they're complete. So on the left-hand side of my screen, I've got the mudlarked object, which is a very small leather book cover that dates to around the 1550s, and it would have been from a book of prayer. And the back with two armoured figures. On the back is St. George standing over the dragon. It's quite hard to see on the object when you're looking at it through a glass case. So we worked with one of the mudlarks, who's also a very talented illustrator, to draw out the detail of the decoration on the book cover so that visitors can understand and help to read the objects for themselves. We have also included some contemporary artwork which shows how the objects may have been worn or used. And on the right-hand side of the screen, we've got the mudlarked object, which is this wire work. It's either a necklace or it would have been worn around the waist. It's in 1957. The lady depicted there is wearing something really very similar, worn at both her waist and around her neck as well. And so that's the first section where you are exploring the different stories. And then the idea is that you go through the corridor and you have the soundscape as you step off the foreshore and you continue in the journey of what happens next. In this next room, we are recreating a mudlark studio, a space within the mudlark's home where they clean the finds, where they start to research them and start to use different creative methods to understand the whole, how they may have been made and how they may have been used. And also we have a recreation of the behind the scenes of the museum where we meet with mudlarks and where we do the finds recording. And if I click on, within this section of the Mudlark Studio, we've got portraits of different mudlarks at home to give a little glimpse of what their homes look like as they got them woven with all of their mudlark finds, just beautifully displayed in their sitting rooms, in their homes. And on the left-hand side, we've got a tiny, beautiful journal that's created by the mudlark in the photograph. He describes the foreshore, the day, the tide, the weather, and then he illustrates what he found and sort of like identifies it and writes down anything that interests him that's also includes his research into the artifacts and what we, the museum, have also said about it. It's the most beautiful record of every single visit of his to the foreshore. And then we also have interactives built into this space. As one of the mudlarks is a talented potter, and he came up with the idea of all the tiny scraps of pottery that are found on the foreshore. What happens if we put them back onto the potter's wheel and then photograph exposure photography? It builds up a picture of what the broken fragment would have looked like when it was complete. And this is a moment in the exhibition where the visitors can spin the wheel for themselves and see on the screen the complete vessel emerging as they spin it. And then this is behind the scenes. This is a true scale photograph taken of the space where we meet the mudlarks, where we record them, our books, where we store the finds while we're working on them, the photography setup. And we have printed this and we have it displayed on one of the walls of the exhibition. We have another interactive, which some of the objects are on a turntable. And we also have a case. And within that case, we have one object that we change every single month, and each time we incorporate a new find, a new discovery. So it holds that message that there are always new things being found on the foreshore, and it's all contributing to the really valuable resource that the research builds up. And then the final moment of the exhibition, the conclusion of it all at the end, is this large artwork by artist, and it's accompanied by a soundscape created by the composer Felix Taylor. And in this, we wanted a space where visitors can is recordings of the river and also the sound of searching, the sound of a trowel on the pebbles. And we wanted this space to be a point of connection where the visitors can connect again to the river and the fact that it is tidal thanks to the gravitational pull of the moon, but also the different phases of the moon affect how high or how low the tide is. So some of the best tides are searching are thanks to the phases of the moon. And so the mudlarks really carefully watch the moon. They look at the tide timetables to see when are the best opportunities to search. And for them, the river and the act of searching is about so much that happens for 2 hours during low tide. It is important to their well-being. The act of searching is meditative, it's peaceful, and there is that connection of a long thread of history that connects mudlarks and their lives today with those historic people and their lives. And it just makes you feel a part of something that is so much bigger. So that is a brief walk through the exhibitions. Now, I just wanted to take a little look at some of the key artifacts that are in the exhibition and some of the research and how we've used them. One of the most famous artifacts, the Thames'i shield, which comes from the Iron Age, and it dates to around 200-100 BCE. This is a loan from the British Museum, and we're very grateful that they were able to lend it to us. It is an incredible artifact of the highest craft skills to produce it. The bronze is incredibly thin. It's a shield, and it would have had a wooden backing, so it would have been strong and functional. And then it is beautifully decorated with this circular spiral pattern that's inlaid with red glass. When the shield was new, it would have absolutely shone like the sun, and the red glass would have been incredibly vibrant. To the movement of the shield, as it would have been used, as it was swung around to act both defensively, but also to be used as a very effective weapon, I think it would be an almost magical sight to see it. And this was found in the 1800s by mudlarks searching on the foreshore, and I can only imagine how they felt when they did reveal it. And for me, this object in the exhibition is tying into the role of the river as it would have been in prehistory. It was a route of connection between this country and the nearby continent, where we know that there was so much communication of people. But it wasn't just a practical thing. It was also a link to spiritual worlds and a key player in people's beliefs. It was believed that it was a connection between the world of the living and the world of the dead, that it was possible to communicate with the dead, communicate with ancestors perhaps, or perhaps there were gods that could be found within the water. But what we can see through the artifacts is that we have really incredibly important artifacts, such as the Thames'i shield, that have been deliberately placed into the river. And this isn't just a London practice. When we look archaeologically at other rivers across Britain, and practices of important, valuable objects that are deliberately put into the rivers, perhaps as offerings, perhaps to accompany the dead. And then another of my favourite objects. We've gone from quite large to this time absolutely tiny. And this is a Roman intaglio that dates to around the 100s, the 200s. So it's about 200 to 400 years after the Thames'i shield. Again, this example is glass, and it has got a god depicted on it. These would have been worn in rings, as I'm sure you're known. But there is one patch of the foreshore just by the city that is provided In total, we have around 30, and that number keeps going up as more are found. And this is what's exceptional. This small area of the foreshore is yielding all of these intaglios. And we have precious gemstones. We also have glass. Some of them are blank. They haven't been carved with their motif yet. Some of them are still set within the rings. And we've got an example in the middle at the bottom where it was worn within an iron ring. We can see gods, we can see animals with the scorpions, the pike, the raven, all linked to various gods. And in the center is a green carnelian that shows 4 horses pulling a chariot and the god Sol as. So what are they doing on this bit of foreshore? That we don't know. The Romans founded Londinium right there on the banks of the Thames. It was a busy port. It was also, again, a rubbish bin, and a lot of things ended up in the river. So perhaps these were washed out in the bathhouses and ended up in the drains before ending up on the river. But we also know it was a sacred space for the Romans as well. And so whether these things may have gone in as offerings, we don't know. Coming forward in time again, this is another small object about the size of half of my thumb. On one side, it's got the face of a beautiful woman. It is a paternoster bead that would have been part of a string of rosary beads, and it would have been the bead that marked the rhythm of the prayers for saying the prayer Paternoster, Our Father. So it would have been worn about the person, it would have been used daily, it would have been handled. And I love that personal connection between the person who would have used it and perhaps it broke, and that's how it ended up in the river. It dates to the 1500s, and we know that there were centres of production in both Paris and London that were making them. I haven't been able to work out if this is a French example or a London example, people that were living in London at the time. So it may well have been a personal possession of them, or may have been of London production. When it was found embedded in the foreshore, just starting to be revealed by the tide, and it was the skull that was facing upwards. And this is the mudlark who found it on the right, Caroline Nunnelly. She was searching on her hands and knees and just saw this skull looking at her from the foreshore. It was a remarkable moment, and one that was so poignant to her as she was battling a period of ill health. And for the medieval person who owned it, it was a reminder that life and death are interwoven and death is often inevitable. For Caroline, it's bigger than herself and her health worries, but also that scary reminder that death truly is inevitable. But fortunately, I'm happy to report that Caroline is in good health right now. And these, on the left-hand side, are 3 sculptures that we include in the exhibition, each of them depicting mudlarks with some of their important finds that have become their heads, and held in their hands are their own heads. And it's looking at the practice of who is finding whom. And Caroline is the 3rd sculpture, searching on her hands and knees, and the Memento Mori rosary bead has replaced her head in a really striking design. And again, visitors look at things in a slightly different way, of looking at the craft of making these sculptures, but also the craft of making the artifacts themselves.
Sorry, there are
and
2
then
minutes
another
left.
object. Thank you, I'm almost there. So I'll just briefly talk about my favourite object, another favourite object of an eel spear, iron, beautifully preserved in the mud, and talks about how the river would have been a provider of food and drink in the 1400s. And eels were just so important in London as a food, but also so valuable that they were used to pay. But a changing climate meant that the Thames was not suitable for eels, and their numbers plummeted. And in the 1300s, we started a trade agreement with the Dutch where they could import eels live to London. And there were eel ships, as shown on this panorama, which would dock in the Thames, where their hulls had been converted to keep the eels alive for trade. They continued to be a landmark on the river into the early 1900s. I unfortunately don't have time to talk about the dove's type, but let's see. I'll just come to my conclusion now. So it is a phenomenal river. It is a connecting city, but also so important for our links with Europe. It's important throughout time, and it continues to be important today. The river is a holder of and a preserver of these artifacts. It holds on to these stories, and they are all at risk from the erosion, from being lost forever. And it's thanks to the mudlarks who are there every single tide, who so carefully find these objects, but then by reporting them, they're building up a huge body of data, which is so important for our understanding of the city today, but also at points in the past. Thank you very much. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you, Kate, for a very good overview of an exhibition we would all love to be visiting. I'm sorry that the connection will let the sound a bit down, but I hope everybody understood the important moments. I'm sure there will be questions. Ilmselt on küsimusi. Yes.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Can you tell us a little bit about the legal situation? Like, are these people allowed to keep what they find, or are they just collecting for the sake of preserving history and donating everything to the museums?
Great question. Thank you very much. Everyone needs a permit to be able to search the river, and the permits are controlled by the Port of London Authority, so you can apply online there. It's written into the permit that all artefacts must be reported and recorded by the museum, and so we work really closely with mudlarks, and we've worked closely with them for decades, so it is a really good relationship that we have with them. The permit says that legal ownership stays with the Port of London, but that the mudlarks are able to keep and enjoy and research the artefacts at home. They use them for events, they use them to share with the public, to tell them and the archaeology of the river. And then if they wish to no longer have them, then they need to go back to the Port of London Authority and request permission to pass them on to someone else, or what happens to them, and the museum gets first refusal at that point.
Thank you. Kas on veel küsimusi?
Sorry, I'm an art historian, not a fisherman, but this eel anchor, it was very fascinating. With such white blades, we have just a narrower one. Is it the only example, or are there many of those just to anchor the eels, which were, as I understood, very important at some moment in England?
Thank you. It's not the only example, but they're not terribly common. Because they're made from iron, they often will corrode, and we don't have many surviving examples. What's also interesting is that only a few eel spears were used. The main way of catching eels was through nets or traps, and weirs were highly effective at capturing them as well. But they caught so many that there had to be a law put in place illegal to do, as they were trying to balance the huge demand for eels alongside with conserving their numbers. It's an age-old problem that we continue to wrestle with about how to protect our food sources. So this spear, it would have been personal use for catching, and again, there were controls around this. And I rather like to think that maybe it was being used when it got trapped in the mud or caught or lost in that way, and that's how we have it preserved. I agree with you. The blades look incredibly close together, and I haven't ever seen one like this in use. And I would, aside from catching eels, I'd like to understand more about how they work.
Thank you. Is there one more short question? It seems there's not. So thank you again for the presentation, and we'll move on.